So, what do you think? Do obvious racist, homophobic attacks qualify as hate speech? Not necessarily, says YouTube. So can tech companies be trusted to police hate speech at all online? Welcome to Roundtable. Very good to have you with us. I'm David Foster. Now, this is what I'm talking about. A conservative commentator who published a series of racist and homophobic attacks on YouTube has been allowed to keep his platform. And that, among other things, has raised questions about whether technology companies are sticking to their own rules on hate speech.
More than half of Americans say they experienced online hate speech in 2018. According to a survey by the Anti-Defamation League, 37% of them reported severe attacks, including sexual harassment and stalking. And for a third of victims, online abuse was in response to their sexual orientation, religion, race, ethnicity, gender identity, or disability. Tech giants such as YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Google had their own definitions of hate speech. Users have to follow a set of rules, and the companies can limit certain forms of expression, but they can be reluctant to act.
This is called gatekeeping.
Carlos Maza is an online video journalist who covers President Trump's battles with the media. Maza faced repeated attacks from right-wing YouTuber Steven Crowder, who has almost 4 million subscribers. Crowder referred to Maza as a lispy sprite, a little queer, and gay Mexican. These videos get millions of views on YouTube, Maza tweeted. Every time one gets posted, I wake up to a wall of homophobic or racist abuse on Instagram and Twitter. According to YouTube, Crowder didn't explicitly incite hate or encourage harassment in his videos, and was instead simply responding to criticism. But how do we define online hate speech? And can tech companies be trusted to police it?
Pleased to say that with me at the round table we have Aidan White, who's president of Ethical Journalism Network. Nighat is here, founder of the Digital Rights Foundation. Kris Sangani too, a tech journalist. And on the line from Brussels, Jan Penfrat from the European Digital Rights. Great to have you all with us. Do you know that in the time it takes us to record this program, 9,000 hours of video will have been uploaded to YouTube? It's no surprise that they can't police it. It's impossible. Aidan?
Yeah, well, it is absolutely right. It's impossible. I mean, they are dealing with revolutionary change, and to a certain extent, they're responsible for it by the way that they've developed technology in order to encourage people to be able to communicate with one another. And to the greatest extent, that's entirely beneficial and liberating for all of us. It's made life a lot better for a lot of people. But at the same time, it's got a darker side. We've seen the growth of hate speech. We've seen the growth of terrorists using social media. We've seen more abuse. We've seen a situation where there are antisocial activities which are damaging the model of good social media and its liberating effects. And the big question that we're trying to deal with is, are tech companies taking their responsibility to make the public information sphere less toxic?
But given the fact that it is so difficult because of the amount that's on there and the number of people and the sort of programs you might have to check this, are they, in your opinion, doing the best that
no,
they're
not. I mean, they're clearly not. I mean, and one of the reasons why they're not is because when this process began, it didn't seem to them that the issue of what is the dark side, what are the negative side, what is the public interest values at work here wasn't the primary concern. The primary concern for them was developing a business model through exploitation of technology which would deliver handsome profits, and that has worked really well. So these companies work on the basis of promoting clickbait, actually. They're looking for attention-seeking, potentially viral information sources, and they're not really interested in the quality of that information. For them, the main question is, will it generate enough clicks in order to trigger advertising? Now, that raises a big question, which is, well, where's the public interest in all of that?
Okay.
How do we protect ourselves? They can't do it themselves. One, because there's too much to police, and two, because they don't have the mindset mindset that puts the public interest first.
Nighat, I will come to you about your work in Pakistan, where this is of a particular concern in just a moment, if I may. But let's throw this one out there. Kris and Jan, I mean, Aidan's right. There is so much money to be made in this that it would not be impossible, even though I posited that idea, it would not be impossible to employ enough people and get enough programs together to make sure that this sort of stuff was not available online. Kris, you first?
Well, you can actually argue that the social media companies are simply not putting enough resources to moderating this content. Let's face it, the technology that's needed to actually moderate this content fast enough simply doesn't exist. We're talking about artificial intelligence. It's still mainly moderated by humans. 7,500 humans in one big sweaty building.
300 hours uploaded every minute.
Yes.
They can't
absolutely.
do it, can they?
I'm talking specifically about Facebook, but equally there's simply no way for any army of people to actually moderate that content.
I wonder what we're complaining about if it's impossible. Are we saying that they were irresponsible to have arrived at this point in the first place?
Let's face it, Mark Zuckerberg went in front of Congress and he mentioned artificial intelligence almost 30 times as if it's just around the corner. It's not around the corner. It's like nuclear fusion. It's always 5 years in the future. What artificial intelligence does is actually learns from humans. And the type of people that the social media companies are actually employing to moderate the content, the artificial intelligence engines are meant to learn from them. But if you're only paying minimum wage or near minimum wage, and the people that you're employing are simply following strict rules and have rules on the toilet breaks that they actually take, the quality of that content
but maybe the technology is coming. The position, Jan, Jan, you come in, and then I will ask you about Pakistan.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I just wanted to make an additional point here on artificial intelligence because it's been in the media a lot and it's been hyped a lot, even by the very companies we are talking about. Even if this technology would work the way that people promising it's going to work, it comes with a whole lot of other problems from a fundamental rights perspective, because as Kris already kind of hinted at, the learning algorithms that are used in this technology are always only as good as the data that they're learning from. And the data that they can use only is real world data, and real world data is messy, it's biased, it's discriminating, and this is what we've seen in artificial intelligence.
So I come back once again to say, so what are we complaining about? We created this monster, we populate it, we make it even more popular day by day, and we say, hang on, it's not right. Yeah.
Well,
Aidan.
No, I mean, look.
I keep saying I'll bring it in a second, Nighat,
look, we didn't create it. In the sense, what we're living with today is a result of how technology has been taken off in one direction, very important direction, and it's given us great opportunities.
But we didn't physically create it, but we created its popularity.
We created its popularity, and it's true. We have sacrificed our identity and our private lives in order to get access to free services. There's no doubt at all it's a Faustian pact.
So tough luck, whatever people say to us out there, we've got to put up with it.
No, we don't have to put up with it. We can embrace it, and we can support it, and we can tailor it to make it human scale, to make it fit in with all the sorts of difficulties and problems that sort of societies have, and we can help those societies by using the technology in a beneficial way. And at the same time, we can help the tech companies make money, but perhaps not as much as they'd like to.
Again, let's talk about society in Pakistan, because this is where you particularly study digital rights, etc. What causes offence in your country is unlikely in other countries to cause the same level or offence at all. Therefore, what is hate speech in Pakistan is very different to what it is elsewhere.
Yeah, so
how do you police that?
So this is something that we have been pushing in making the companies realize that the hate speech that might not be a hate speech in US or in Europe, that speech has like real life offline world repercussions in countries like Pakistan. And when they're like the content on YouTube or other platforms, when they refuse to remove that content, saying that it's a free speech, that has actually real life repercussions for human rights defenders, activists, and journalists who only have online space because the offline space or the civic spaces are already shrinking in countries like ours. So that's the only space that they have.
But do you see the problems that these tech companies have? Because there's so much there, and there's nobody that you can call to say, could you please take that one down, we don't like it.
Definitely.
Because it's impossible to do so. So what do you recommend?
So I think tech companies first of all, we need to understand why they are there. Their aim is to make profits, right? Their aim is not to keep human rights at the center of their technology or the platform or whatever the platforms are doing. So I think the work that I do in Pakistan, I think tech companies need to be very, very understandable in terms of understanding the different contexts. I have been hearing a lot about AI and algorithms and how they are making these decisions, and I feel that they are making money out of our data, right? And
but that's a different argument, isn't it? We're talking about offensive, rancorous, bigoted statements that are put out online.
Yeah, I mean, the issue that you raised, essentially, look at the background of the founders of these tech companies. They're white, male, and they're in their 20s when they actually found their companies. And essentially, they live in a culture, the West Coast of America, where free speech is considered much more highly than, and in fact, hate speech isn't really as a crime.
Yes.
It does exist in other jurisdictions, but not really in the US. So there's a different value attached to that. To create a global community with one set of values is something that the social media companies will not be able to do.
But we're whistling in the wind here, aren't we? I mean, they're out to make money. They might listen to the consumers if the consumers were going to go elsewhere, and in other words, not give them as much money. So the pressure has to come from groups such as yours and from publicity such as this, for what it's worth. But we are whistling in the wind because they are too powerful and the international laws are too disparate.
Well, Facebook has actually created this chalice. They filled it with poison, which is the data. And now, actually, they're trying to say, look, let's hand it to the regulators and let you deal with it. It's simply not that easy. They found it very difficult. And they know it's
the regulators
going to be
aren't going to do it, and the tech companies aren't that interested. I've got to bring Jan in here, and then Aidan, back to you. If the tech companies aren't interested and the regulators can't do it, or the other way round, I can't remember which it is, but if those 2 points aren't coming together on this, how's it going to happen?
I actually do see a role for regulators, and now I have to admit that I don't know the situation in Pakistan very well, but at least for the European Union, there is a strong desire on policymaking side to regulate things such as hate speech, but not only, also online terrorist content. And what we're seeing here is that there is a strong belief among policymakers in automated content moderation systems, because that is kind of perceived as the silver bullet solving this very, very complex question of problematic speech. And so I think also this is what this kind of legislation is what platform providers fear. So they're trying to kind of muddy the waters and try to get as an outcome a legislation they can live with.
The trouble is, you see, what happens is it's not about AI. When somebody points something out, as you say, to them, they just leave it up there.
They do leave it up there. And the point about it is that the history, the very short history that we've got in dealing with this problem indicates that the tech companies will only respond when they're put under hard pressure by one of three groups. The first group that's really important to them are the advertisers. If advertisers don't like what they're doing, they will respond. The second group that's important to them are the politicians. If the politicians decide to impose laws, then they will respond. The best example of that is actually in Europe, where in Germany, a couple of years ago, they introduced a takedown law regarding Facebook on the questions of disinformation. That had an immediate effect. The immediate effect was that Facebook immediately employed hundreds and thousands more moderators to look at the quality of the information that was being put out to German subscribers. And the German subscribers get a better service today.
And the third group is...
And the third group is us.
Subscribers, yes.
The third group, least regarded, and with least effect, are we the users. And you can complain and all you want and ask for takedown as much as you want as an individual or even a small group, but you may wait years for a response. So the reality of it is very strong. It seems to me that all the evidence points towards the need for more regulation. The European Union is indeed leading the way on this question of regulation regarding disinformation, privacy rights, data protection, and so on, even copyright. And that's very, very important. And the United States is playing catch up. But there's no doubt at all we're going to have more legislation in future.
Let's get a personal story.
Can I just say...
Can I come to Nighat on this one? Tell us what you want to say, but I want to point out that you were Time Magazine's Next Generation, one of the young leaders, particularly when it came to fighting online harassment. I'll ask you to tell us about that in just a moment if you want to say what you had planned to say first.
Yeah, so I just wanted to chime in around the discussion around regulations and policies that are being developed in the Europe, in the Western world, where the rule of law is strong. And I think this is very worrying development for the countries where the rule of law is very weak, because the countries like ours, they always copycat and they say, oh, so look at the Western world, look at the developed world, they are, making these legislations. But when we make these legislations around regulating internet, around disinformation, around hate speech, these regulations are always misused and always misused against the people who are at margins. And that's what we have seen.
An example being?
So the example is like Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act in Pakistan that was enacted in 2016 in the name of protecting internet users against the harassment, hate speech,
and this
terrorism.
is what I was referring to,
yes,
is it, when it comes to your campaign?
Exactly. And now the same law which was enacted in the name of protecting people in the online space against hate speech and disinformation, that law is now being used against journalists, human rights defenders, political dissidents. So they are now being prosecuted. So I'm very worried about this trend of making regulations and legislation. Might be good for Europe, might be good for other Western world, but really not good for so-called repressive regimes like in the disguise of democracy.
It brings us back to free speech, doesn't it, here?
Yes, I mean, as I said, I mean, there's no global community that completely agrees as to what weight you give to free speech and what weight you actually give to let's say, to the hate crimes that can actually result from free speech. The point you made about privacy is important because obviously, yes, in terms of an individual's right to actually have their private communication on a private messenger service such as WhatsApp, encrypted end-to-end so that even the provider can't see what that communication is. That could easily put vulnerable people, such as children, in danger if law enforcement can't see what's being conspired in a WhatsApp group.
And in terms of international, you concentrate specifically on Europe, but in terms of international rules and regulations when it comes to this, are you aware of any sort of umbrella organization that might be trying to pull this together?
Well, first, let me emphasize how I think how much I agree with what Nighat just said. I think often we think in terms of legislation. We think about Europe and how it works in the US, and we forget how it would what is the impact on the rest of the world. And this is also why we as European digital rights are continuously emphasizing how important it is to not try to give governments too much power to regulate speech and to regulate what's wrong and what's right on the internet. Another good example from Europe is a law that is currently debated on online terrorist content, which basically gives law enforcement the power to take down content because it's considered terrorist content, but the definition of what terrorist content really is very vague, and we fear that this is a law that can easily be abused by governments to take down all kinds of unwanted speech on the internet. I think what would be much more prudent for governments to do, rather than trying to regulate the legality of every single piece of content, would be to put obligations on platforms to invest in resources. That was already mentioned, human resources to verify the legality of content, but also to put in place clear and easy flagging procedures that would allow users to flag content, and then YouTube needs, or Facebook and the other platforms need to follow up. It's just not acceptable that if you flag content which is considered hate speech, and then a platform just doesn't respond for weeks and weeks.
Okay. Let me
the
come
numbers
back to
I've
Nighat.
heard is that,
if you don't mind, let's come back to Nighat and your campaign to prevent online harassment against women. How successful has that been, and in what way? How have you achieved that?
So our work is around gender and technology, and we look into how women who already have lesser access to technology in countries like ours, what kind of experiences they face. And in a patriarchal society, it's very difficult for them first to reclaim internet, and when they do, there is a lot of backlash that they face.
But this is the online harassment.
This is the online harassment, exactly.
Which is hate speech.
Hate speech, or defamation or sexualized content and things like that. But the thing that we saw in Pakistan, that when women, they report to social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, and the content which is in regional language, they do not take down that content because they do not understand that constitute harassment in that particular regional language. And that's where we pushed Facebook and other platforms that what they can do about it. So Facebook did a little bit of work in translating their reporting mechanisms, and we started a cyber harassment helpline in 2016 because we were starting to getting lots of complaints from marginalized communities. So we started an escalation channel with Facebook. So where a human rights defender, a journalist whose life is at risk because of the online content, we escalate that complaint to Facebook.
Okay, so you've seen it work to some extent. It just needed to be scaled up. Is that what these tech companies need to do? They need to think about 1,000, maybe 100,000 pieces in a jigsaw and deal with each one individually.
This is an excellent example. You can take this Pakistan example and you can put it into 20, 30 other countries around the world, Sri Lanka and elsewhere and so on, Myanmar, where there have been massive problems and so on. So it's a massive problem. I think that the part of the solution is in the hands of the tech companies. Just as they can cooperate over Pakistan, they can cooperate, and they can... Look, we get where we are today because some very, very smart people work for some companies. And these are very bright people. They're very smart. They're smarter than any of us around the table, and they can sort of do wonderful things. And actually, I'm in awe of them. I think it's fantastic. I think all we need to do is to get these smart people working on some of the solutions. If we actually applied the brains of the bright
what is in
sparks,
it for them? Is it the three losses that they would suffer if they don't do this that you outlined?
I have to say that if you want to serve the public interest in any area of the economy, you can't actually only do it if profit and making profit is the sole reason why you're doing it. The moment public interest comes into the picture, you have to moderate your assessment of what you can make. It does mean, there's no question about it, it does mean that the future will be bright if the companies are willing to sacrifice a little bit of their profits in order to help the public interest.
Part of the same question, Jan, if I may, do you think perhaps the most successful companies in the end, and we're not necessarily talking about those that are already out there, the most successful companies out there in the end will be those that at least appear to have a conscience, which is effectively what we're talking about here, listening to the public and taking down hateful material?
I would love that to be true, but I'm not as hopeful. I don't think, yes, the companies could solve many of these problems, but I don't think they will, not on their own, because they don't have an interest in doing so. So what we need is strong regulation that changes the incentives we've talked about this in the beginning, right? In the beginning we said, obviously the companies want to make money. How do the companies make money? They make it through engagement. They want to maximize engagement of users. And for that engagement to transform into profits, it doesn't matter what kind of engagement it is. It doesn't matter if it's hate speech or white supremacist propaganda or Islamist extremist terrorist content.
So conscience is a luxury. Quick thought, Aidan, because we haven't got very much longer now.
I mean, conscience is not a luxury. We live in a world in which being ethical is absolutely essential to the quality of public life. Today, there's a lack of public trust in democratic institutions, in parliaments, in governments, in human rights, in the protection of people's human rights. We need to rebuild public confidence. How do we rebuild public confidence? I think people who exercise power, political centres of power, commercial centres of power, have a job to do in rebuilding public confidence. They must be ethical, they must be open and transparent in the way that they work, and they must reach out to people and to sort of challenge anxieties and uncertainties people have. This isn't some sort of crazy idealism. It's the nature of how we must develop, and the technology companies have an opportunity, if they want to help us move forward.
Perhaps it might help them move forward too. Listen, it always goes so awfully quickly. Thank you very much indeed. We've run out of time. Jan, thank you very much indeed in Brussels. Appreciate the contributions there have been at the table, and very best of luck with all of that work out in Pakistan. Thank you for coming on the programme. From me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, just a reminder that you can pick up our programmes on YouTube and other ways too. See you next time. Bye-bye.